This video is brought to you by mybookie.ag. We are here for UFC 283, the first pay-per-view of 2023, and we have some great fights throughout the whole thing. Initially before, it didn't look that great, but when you really take a deeper dive into the fights, there's a lot of great ones, man, even starting out in the early prelims with Josiane Nunes, who I think is, if she can make 135 again, the best prospect 135-pound division that could probably shake it up a bit. Warlley Alves versus Nicholas Dalby is a great fight. We have Terrence McKinney versus Ismael Bonfim, and that's a really interesting one. Terrence McKinney always puts on a good fight, and Bonfim is someone not to look over. At the end of the early prelims, we have Jailton Almeida, the heavyweight prospect everybody has their eyes on. The guy is incredibly athletic, probably needs to tune some things up in his striking technique. He's absolutely gifted though, and we know what they're doing with Shamil. They're placing him as a stepping stone for Almeida. That's what happens with these guys that are over 40 years old that aren't doing too well in their careers. These young guys are going to step right on top of them. And the prospect a lot of people don't know, the undefeated Gabriel Bonfim, I think he's related to Ishmael that's fighting on the early prelims. He's going up against Munir Lazis. This is one of the best fights on the whole card. This is the sleeper of the card. Of course, we still have Thiago Moises on there after Guram pulled out. The card would have been a lot better with Guram in there. Gregory Rodrigues versus Brunno Ferreira is going to be the wildest fight of the whole card. This is a banger. Two guys are going to be throwing leather at each other the whole time until someone falls. I am super excited about this one. In fact, I like it better than the Brad Tavares fight that Rodriguez was a part of. And to headline the prelims is just like that Shamil versus Almeida fight. Shogun is getting used as a sacrifice as he goes up against Ihor Peteria. I feel like this is the end of the road for Shogun. This is going to be a really tough one for him. Peteria is so dangerous. Even though he did lose his last fight, Shogun is just way too old. He can get knocked out on the feet. He can get submitted on the ground. There's many ways Ihor can go into this one and claim that victory. And then for the main card, the whole thing is actually pretty good. Paul Craig versus Johnny Walker, a fight between opposites, the grappler versus striker matchup. Lauren Murphy versus Jessica Andrade, I would say, is the weakest fight on the main card. Everybody already knows how that fight's probably going to play out. Andrade is going to be just way too much. We have Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. It should have been Burns versus Jorge, or Burns versus Colby, or Burns versus someone else. Nothing against Magny. He's a really good fighter, has beaten some great guys in his career, and is one of the most experienced veterans of the division. And then for the co-main event and the first championship fight is Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno 4. It's the fourth fight between two fighters in UFC history. This is your MMA's version of Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Mel Marquez. This also may be Figgy's last fight in the flyweight division because he said after this, he's looking to jump up to 135. If he comes out there with a win and just vacates his belt, it could hurt the flyweight division's image, because that will be the second time that the flyweight champion would have that belt and then move up. And it's crazy because both him and Henry Cejudo are from the same camp. The division is probably rooting for Brandon Moreno to win this, just to keep the legitimacy of the division. And then, of course, for the main event, we have Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill, which was made on very short notice. They didn't have much time to prepare for each other, which is still going to keep it on equal ground here. And it's a fight between opposites, the grappler versus striker, but Glover has good boxing, so he's dangerous everywhere. Jamahal Hill is exceptionally dangerous on the feet using his hands. And as you notice in the card, there's a lot of good prospects. But I have to say, the number one prospect of the card is Gabriel Bonfim. A lot of people are probably thinking it's Jailton Almeida. Bonfim is just so much more technical. He is so good, man. On the feet, on the ground. His wrestling's good. He's young. He's undefeated. The welterweight division needs guys like this. He comes from a boxing background, and his boxing skill is amazing to watch. Tremendously skilled when it comes to his hands. And that is probably going to be the difference between him and Lazis. I want to say the fighter of the night is Deiveson Figueiredo. Deiveson is the only champion on the card. He's going to be defending his belt. All eyes are on him to see if he wins and if he'll move up to 135 afterward. He's also the best fighter on the whole card too. The stake of the night definitely goes to Shamil. Shamil's coming off 3 losses in a row, all TKOs. He's 41 years old and has always been roaming around the number 10 to number 15 spots. He loses to Almeida. This might be the end of his career as a UFC fighter, or he just may even retire after this. I mean, he's so old at this point, and we already know what they're using him for. And then the banger of the night is 100% Gregory Rodrigues versus Brunno Ferreira. That fight is insane. Rodrigues does his best work in wild brawls like that. He has a sharp right straight. He's so physically strong for the middleweight division. Ferreira is pretty small. He's 5'10". He's not even as wide or as stocky as Rodrigues, and Rodrigues is 6'3". But he has more variety when it comes to his striking, and he does attempt double leg takedowns. They actually attempt the same kind of takedowns. no setups for the double legs, and they try to just sweep you off of your feet. Ferreira, though, has good traditional kicks, side kicks, spinning kicks up to your head. Even the way he throws round kicks sometimes are that of like a traditional martial artist. But both these guys do their best work when it comes into these wild, brawling exchanges. And then your fight of the night is for sure Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno 4. They always put on classics. These guys are always part of a good fight. And especially against each other, I mean, you can definitely tell that they are the two best fighters in the flyweight division. Brandon Moreno's chin is always going to be enough for him to make the fight somewhat competitive, right? Because anybody else that Figueiredo hits, they fall. Moreno's the only guy that can really withstand some big blows. But ultimately, we're going to start with Paul Craig versus Johnny Walker. The fight between the opposites. Paul Craig's going to do whatever he can to get this fight to the ground because as defenseless on the feet as Johnny Walker is, Paul Craig's striking proficiency isn't all that great. So I don't think Walker's going to have to worry too much about getting nuked by Paul Craig. Unless Craig throws up some crazy high kick. I mean, he could throw some of those. He's very flexible. But we can only imagine Johnny Walker would dominate the striking. And if it gets to the ground, even if Paul Craig is dropped, Walker needs to be wary of those triangle chokes. Walker's a big favorite, but you have to watch out for those triangles, man. Paul Craig is always a live dog every single time. How many fighters has he made a comeback triangle choke finish against? He is practically the comeback king. He submitted Nikita Krylov. He finished Jamahal Hill. He finished Kennedy Nzechukwu. And we cannot forget the big comeback triangle choke against Magomed Ankalaev, who most people believe is the best fighter in the light heavyweight division. Paul Craig submitted that guy, and he defeated the guy that's fighting for the belt in the main event. You can never overlook Paul Craig, and for someone like Johnny Walker, who, let's be honest, doesn't have the highest fight IQ, chances are he would make that mistake more than anybody else will, right? He hits Paul Craig, Craig falls to the ground, either he baits it, like plays possum, or he does get hurt. Walker follows him to the ground trying to land ground and pound and gets caught up in a triangle. That's why this fight, I believe, is harder to predict than the odds are giving it, because Walker's lack of fight IQ is always going to give his opponent a chance at victory anywhere it goes. The guy is so physically gifted. I would have to say probably the most physically gifted fighter on the UFC roster. I mean, 6'6", 82-inch reach, incredibly athletic, strong, fast. It's just you can't give a guy with a body like that brains as well. So I ultimately will go with Johnny Walker. I think he is learning as much as he can, and maybe he's not going to follow Craig to the ground. That's the thing. If he hurts Paul Craig, let him stand up. Too many fighters have made that mistake of following him to the ground, and he cannot do that. As tough as it is, I'm going to trust Johnny Walker's decision on not following Craig to the ground and winning the fight through a TKO, eventually getting Craig to continuously get up until that eventual finish. So I'm going to go Johnny Walker by a second round TKO. And then we go to Gregory Rodrigues versus Brunno Ferreira. This is going to be a wild one, man. Gregory Rodrigues is quickly becoming one of my favorite fighters in the middleweight division. I mean, I've doubted this guy early on because of his stiffness and his striking, but the guy is so incredibly tough. He has such an amazing chin and absurd power and strength in the clinch. He is the tank of the middleweight division. Like, there's nobody that seems as physically imposing as the fighting Barack Obama. I mean, don't forget, when Kennedy Nzechukwu kneed Rodrigues in the face when he was going in for a takedown and split him open. That knee would have knocked out 99.9% of the people on the planet. And Rodrigues ate the knee and then soon after started returning shots at Chidi. The guy is so incredibly tough. I think because of that chin and his power alone, it's going to give Ferreira a lot of problems. Ferreira, though, has a speed advantage, and maybe he can catch Rodrigues with shots that he doesn't see coming, because he does have those tricky high kicks, and his blitzing left hand from the southpaw stance can be relatively hard to track. And whenever Ferreira commits, he tries to blast right through you with more punches. And that's where Rodrigues is definitely going to try to shine in those moments, which would most likely leave this fight to end by a knockout one way or another. Rodrigues definitely has a really good right straight using that reach advantage, and if Ferreira's in the southpaw stance, which he does take more often than orthodox, it could be a bit of an issue. Remember the time in the Nzechukwu fight where Rodrigues was beaming him down the center with those right straights one after the other and dropped him. He may seem relatively stiff, but his punching speed is not slow. And that's why Rodrigues looks awkward on the feet, because he's so stiff, but his punches come out quick, and it really catches his faster opponents off guard. I can see that same effect happening for Ferreira. And one of the biggest issues for Ferreira is attempting to take Rodrigues to the ground. This guy's posture is hard to break. Ferreira attempts a lot of double legs when things are not going as well on the feet, and that's where he could run into a roadblock. And as you can see for the betting odds, Rodrigues is an over 3-1 favorite. I don't think it's that one-sided, because the power from both of these guys can always change a fight, and neither of them are really that technical. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Gregory Rodrigues and I'm going to go by a first round knockout, being the bigger, stronger, more powerful, and more experienced fighter. The speed is the only thing giving Ferreira a really big chance here, and the fact that neither guy are that technical, the speed advantage can absolutely help him win the fight. And then we go to Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. I mean, what can you really say about this fight? Magny doesn't really have much of a chance. I mean, definitely on the ground, Magny's doing nothing to Burns. If he's getting submitted by guys like RDA, Sergio Moraes, getting beat on the ground by Michael Chiesa, and various other fighters throughout his career, imagine what Burns is going to do. And Burns has stronger wrestling than a lot of those guys. Not only is he the second greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist in welterweight history behind Damian Maia, but he has a stronger wrestling game to go with it. So as soon as it gets to the ground, this fight's over. And Neil Magny is not physically that strong. It's going to be really hard for him to just at least physically try to fend off those takedowns. And regardless of the ground, even on the feet, Magny has a good jab, he puts on a good pace, but as soon as those right overhands come flying at him, things could really change. Burns would probably want to take this fight to the ground as soon as possible because he doesn't have the greatest chin. We saw a better chin against Khamzat, but we've seen him get hurt so many times in his career, it would not surprise me if Neil Magny hurts him. He has a long reach, and there are knees and kicks and such that can catch Burns off guard. That's why Burns also has to attempt intelligent takedowns, shooting at the right moment so he doesn't eat a knee coming in. A guy who's 6'3" like that doesn't need much to bring up a knee to hurt you. But here's the thing, Burns did fight a guy who had incredible knees, and he had to prepare for that when he fought Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker was a tall guy, 6 foot, and he's had some of the best knee knockouts in UFC history. Burns fought that guy, he had to prepare for it. He didn't get caught by those knees, so I do trust his shot selection and against Neil Magny as well. So ultimately, I'm going to go with Gilbert Burns, and I'm going to go by a first round submission. I think either the first or second takedown from Burns is going to get this fight to the ground, and then it's over from there. That's why I can see a first round finish. And then we go to the best fight on the whole card. The co-main event, Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno 4. Crazy, we have a fourth fight between two fighters, the first in UFC history. Just off of that, it has to go and show you that it's one of the best rivalries in UFC history. Two guys have been on top of the division for so long that they can fight 4 times with each other. It's 1-1-1. The winner of this could just concretely say they're the better fighter. This is the fight that matters. This is the fight that will end this rivalry. As you can see, Deiveson is relatively old for the flyweight division right now. He's 35. You don't see a lot of 35-year-olds at flyweight, especially at the top of the division. But what you can see from these two are, they're not taking the punches as well as they used to. Deiveson earlier on in his career was known to be a tank. No one was able to hurt him. He would walk through punches like the Terminator and just nuke you with his right hand. And then you look at Brandon Moreno, who's always known to have an iron chin and an iron will. And Deiveson is like the only guy that's dropping him. And you could definitely see in their third fight that both guys don't take the punches as well as they did in their first fight. The only difference is in the second fight, Figueiredo got dropped by a jab, but we also know about that one that the weight cut going into it was his worst weight cut out of the 3 fights. So you can see from them competing up against each other and all the preparations going into it are damaging them, man. Moreno and Figueiredo are taking a lot out of each other in these fights. I don't think people are talking about that enough. Look at the way that Moreno was dropped in their third fight. That was very different from the other fights they had with each other and Moreno's fights before he fought Figueiredo. And even in the third fight, Brandon Moreno was landing some good punches on Figgy and stunning him. Punches that before he would have taken and just walked right through. In fact, in the first fight, he did that for many of them. He walked right through a lot of Moreno's punches in that first fight. In the third fight, he was barely able to do it at all. He had to really respect the power. And I think Deiveson is doing just as much damage to himself as Moreno is doing to him. If not, he's doing more damage to himself with those weight cuts. He has the second biggest weight cut in UFC history, right behind Rumble Johnson when Rumble was going down to 170. Deiveson's weight cuts are almost the equivalent of losing your whole leg, and that is not exaggerating. The percentage of body weight you lose if you were to theoretically lose your own leg is the amount of weight that Deiveson Figueiredo is losing for the fight. And there's a reason why. Deiveson said after this fight he's going to go up to 135. Before even the fight finished, he's already saying that's what he's going to do. That shows you enough of how tough this weight cut is on him. But looking beside that, looking at the technique and the skills of these two, I mean, they're clearly the best fighters of the whole fight card. Both guys have adjusted in between their fights. Both guys have been looking much better. I would say Moreno is looking technically better, whereas Figueiredo is looking smarter. If you really notice, Figueiredo's techniques haven't really changed that much. He's doing the same thing that he's always been doing, except he's picking his shots much better, he's being more precise, and he's knowing when to commit and when not to commit. All of that comes with experience. With Moreno, if you look at his first fight to his third fight, he looks like a completely different fighter. His combinations are looking better, his stance is even different, his jab is much sharper. He's going to the body well, and those double underhook trips are always going to be a big thing against Figueiredo. And the reason why that is because Figueiredo is amazing when he commits. If he hits you with those shots, it's going to hurt no matter who you are. But as good as he is on the commitment of his shots, he is not good on his retraction. That is where he always gets caught. And he tries to awkwardly get back his balance. It's because he commits so much, he always loses his footing. This is why it becomes so easy for Moreno to change levels under that big punch, under the commitment, get those double underhooks, and trip him out as Figueiredo's trying to retract. So everything is going backwards for Deiveson, which makes the trip so much easier to get against him. And not only that, if Moreno is able to dodge some of those big punches, Deiveson is there to be hit by left hooks especially, because Deiveson is always looking to weave his head around, and that gets intercepted by hooks. Now, we know in the second fight, Moreno has a lot of success off of the jab, and Deiveson didn't have too many answers for it. In fact, he got dropped by that jab. In the third fight, though, it was different. Moreno was still landing them, but Figueiredo found the answer. It's the leg kick, which is a natural counter. If both fighters are orthodox, one fighter's throwing a step-in jab, just like a boxer does, the other guy is able to counter it naturally with a right leg kick. And the reason for that is that step-in jab is coming from the world of boxing. Boxing doesn't have kicks. So when you introduce a kick, it changes the dynamic of the jab, because when you're stepping in, you're making your leg vulnerable. In boxing, you don't have to worry about that vulnerability. In other combat sports, you do. So that's where the leg kick comes in to counter that step. And also, when you're throwing that right leg kick from orthodox, you're naturally getting your head off of the center line, making that jab miss. This is what Deiveson was doing in that fight against Moreno, and he had so much success with it in the first round, to the point where Moreno stopped going to the jab as much in the later rounds and substituted it with more left hooks. And Deiveson didn't have a lot of answers for the left hook. But here's something we do have to also acknowledge about this fight. It comes with the coaches. Figueiredo spent so much time with Henry Cejudo, and Brandon Moreno has to change his coach, because his coach was James Krause. And we all know what's going on with James Krause. So he had to adjust his corner a little bit. And as for Figueiredo, we might see more wrestling out of this guy. He's so big for the division. I can only imagine him adding double leg takedowns and stuff against the smaller Moreno in order to just mix up the game or try to get good positions while on top. That will really add on to everything else that he does, because Deiveson has a magnificent jab. It's like running a steel pull into someone's face. A lot of power, and you definitely see Moreno give a lot of respect to that jab. He has the best right straight in the whole division. That's a shot he nukes people with, and even dropped Moreno in their third fight. Punched right over Moreno's jab. He has a decent step-in left hook, but he always retracts it into a parallel stance. And that's the thing I talked about. Like, his retractions are not all there, man. If he does not land his shots that he commits with, he's always there to be hit. And Deiveson also has an amazing switch into southpaw left high kick. This is a technique he's also caught Moreno with. But ultimately, my prediction is I'm going to go with Deiveson Figueiredo, and I think he's going to win by another decision to close out their rivalry. I see him winning by 48-47. In a very, very close fight. This one might also be controversial. And then we finally go to the main event. Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill. The old versus the young for the vacant light heavyweight title. And it's essentially a fight between opposites. Jamahal Hill's not that great of a grappler. He's definitely more capable on the feet. He has the physical advantages. He has all the attributes, from the reach to the power to the speed. You could even say he's technically a better striker than Glover. He has a great check left hook and an amazing left straight. It can also knock you in the orthodox stance, just like he did against Johnny Walker. So he definitely has a lot of power in both hands. But honestly, he doesn't have a lot of variety. Neither does Glover, though. Glover is mainly a boxer on the feet and relies on the complete fundamentals. Hands up high, constant pressure, pumps a lot of jabs at you, throws in left hooks, and a lot of right straights to hurt you until he shoots in for that takedown. I don't think he wants to strike too much with Jamahal Hill. Shooting takedowns immediately should be Teixeira's way to win this. Right off the bat, you could definitely see where a lot of people are going to be picking him off the fact that he's beaten plenty of younger guys that were supposed to knock him out on the feet. He did against Thiago Santos. He did against Anthony Smith. He did against Nikita Krylov. Even Jan Blachowicz. Is anything going to be different about Jamahal Hill that those guys couldn't really do? And you have to say someone like Thiago Santos is much trickier to strike with. And yes, Glover did get hurt in that fight, but he quickly got in that takedown. I would have to say, though, with the way that Jamahal Hill commits into his punches, he might punch harder than most of the other guys that Glover has fought. He will definitely commit more into a single punch, and that can end a fight very quickly for Glover. So I will say, if Teixeira is smart, shooting takedowns early and just try to get this fight over with, going to the path of least resistance, honestly, I don't think would be that difficult for him to do. He's taking down much better wrestlers, guys with much better takedown defense, and definitely much better grappling skills on the ground. Glover can be relatively easy to hit if he stays on the feet too long, especially from uppercuts. You might see that out of Jamahal Hill. This is something that plenty of fighters have said before about Teixeira's boxing style, is he's open to the uppercut. And we've seen that before when he fought like Rumble Johnson, when he fought Gustafsson. The uppercut is definitely a big weapon to answer a lot of Glover's striking. So ultimately, I think this fight is going to come down to IQ. Who makes the correct decisions and who doesn't want to test each other in their own department. We know Jamahal Hill is not going to want to test Glover on the ground. Will Glover want to test Jamahal Hill on the feet? That's the only thing I worry about. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Glover Teixeira because he does have that experience. He should make the right decisions. And I'm going to go by a second round submission. I think as soon as this fight gets to the ground, the fight's pretty much over. I think he will smother Hill, add on that pressure, and eventually get that rear naked choke or even an arm triangle finish. So as you can see, the odds on this card are pretty out there. Glover Teixeira is an underdog. Deiveson Figueiredo is an underdog. Johnny Walker is a pretty big favorite. And of course, Gilbert Burns is a 5-1 favorite. And I think his chances of winning are probably better than anybody else's. So the best place to go to capitalize on these odds is definitely mybookie.ag. Whether you agree or disagree, going with the favorite that is most certainly going to win or going with the upset. MyBookie has the best odds, and don't forget to use the promo code if you are to sign up for their first deposit bonus. It's always Weasel. And to get out of the way, the craziest one, Jailton Almeida is a minus 1100 favorite. That is pretty crazy. I don't think he's that much of a favorite because Shamil is somewhat still dominant on the ground. He is very strong. This is heavyweight as we know, and I don't think anybody in the heavyweight division is a minus 1100 favorite unless it's like Ngannou versus... I mean, even Greg Hardy shouldn't be that big of an underdog against someone like Ngannou because anything can happen. But he should definitely win. Jailton Almeida should win that fight. I just don't like seeing crazy odds like that at heavyweight. And then the next biggest one is Josiane Nunes. And I do think she should win hers. She's very strong. She has knockout power, extremely scrappy, and I also believe she's more technical than Dos Santos. Not Junior Dos Santos, of course. And we just talked about Gilbert Burns, minus 500. I do expect him to win, and Jessica Andrade is the same exact thing, minus 500. I think Andrade's chances are better than Burns, given that she's better than Lauren Murphy almost everywhere, but I am pretty confident in both those fighters winning. So I'll just go off the bat and say the lock-ins of the card are Gilbert Burns, Jessica Andrade, Jailton Almeida, Josiane Nunes, and putting up a parlay is not a bad idea. Fights can be relatively unpredictable, but I would say this card is one of the best when it comes to parlays because there's a big chance a lot of fighters here win their fights. Even Terrence McKinney should put on a good performance against Bonfim, but I'm not going to say him winning is a lock. The kind of confident wins for me are Terrence McKinney, Gregory Rodrigues, Igor Pateria, Johnny Walker, and Glover Teixeira. I would say Glover Teixeira and Deiveson Figueiredo are definitely your dogs of the card. If there's any underdog that's going to win, it's probably these two. And it's still crazy that they're underdogs. Knowing that Deiveson won his last fight, and he practically won the first fight against Moreno, but he got a point deducted. And Glover, given his style and experience, I am kind of shocked he's actually not a favorite. But he is going up against a younger guy, and oftentimes whenever he does go up against these strikers, people think he's going to lose. Could this be the one? It's really hard to predict. And when we start talking about props, Glover's biggest way of winning this fight is either TKO or submission. I don't see him winning this by a decision. It would be crazy to see Jamahal Hill actually survive on the ground for 5 rounds. I don't see that happening. So either Glover finishes him with ground and pound or submits him. I think the submission is more likely given how tough Hill is. And for Gilbert Burns, submission is probably the most likely way he would win. So if you want to go with that prop instead of just going with the minus 500 line, you probably want to go with submission, but he could also knock Neil Magny out. So it's a bit tricky there. But the most for sure way of victory are Gregory Rodrigues by knockout, Cody Stamann by decision, and maybe Johnny Walker by knockout. The only thing about the Walker fight is it could go to a decision if the fight is just a stalemate the whole time. Craig keeps going to the ground, Walker's not chasing him down there, but Craig is being very defensive on the feet where Walker can't really crack him with a good one. I can see it playing out like that. And remember, when you go to mybookie.ag and you sign up for the deposit bonus, make sure to use the promo code WEASEL. They'll match what you put in all the way up to $1,000, and that promo code is WEASLE. Make sure to visit mybookie.ag today where you can win big. And that is ultimately the end of the predictions, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to give this a thumbs up. Enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.